New on Curiosity Stream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com. New on Curiosity Stream.
I'm James Burke. I'm going to take you on a journey through time.
James Burke's visionary series returns, reimagined for our time.
Now, this is all uncharted territory.
The Washington Post hails Burke as one of the most intriguing minds in the Western world. The New York Times raves he careens from one great moment in history to another.
Where do we want to go from here?
Experience all new Connections.
So what's the next connection?
With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers. Welcome to a second episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis today. I'm Gigi. Hope you're having a good evening. It's around 8 o'clock. I was going to do this much earlier, but both of my high schoolers are taking forensics. And so, I'm at that stage as mom where everybody hangs out here because this is the fun house, which I don't let it get too fun. Don't get me wrong. But then, I'm lame to my kids. But then guess who came in really, really handy tonight when they needed help with their forensics homework? I'm the rock star of the house right now. So it's worth being late. Love my kids. Love teaching them all about this stuff. All right. So real quick, I want to give a big, big thank you to Lori C for the Venmo. I do appreciate you. So you see my new layout here, guys. This is actually a live count of my YouTube subscribers. I'm learning how to do this new software called OBS. It's not new. It's new to me. And I can do these little layouts where, it looks a little more official and it's not just me in the screen. So I'm having fun with it. It will probably change as the wind blows until I will probably never be satisfied with just one. So it may just be different all the time. I don't know yet. All right. So music fact of the day. So on July 11th, 1969, David Bowie released Space Odyssey. Love the song. We play this a lot around here. This was just a week before the moon landing, but the BBC refused to play it until the astronauts, which was Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, had safely returned to Earth. Once they landed, the song just exploded in the charts. And in fact, a lot of times when my kids aren't paying attention to me, I will say ground control to Major Tom, but I sing it. So there you go. All right. So I am working on some new things to incorporate into this podcast. And I want to show you a thing here. So it does these really cool transitions. Check it. Whoop. All right. So this picture's just very weird to look at for me, given what we know and what we're learning every day with testimony. But this is essentially the Roden and the Wagner family at what I believe is George IV's wedding to who I believe on the far right to be Tabitha. But it's weird because you look, George IV has his arm around Frankie all the way over to Chris. You got Billy in the back. You've got Jake with his arm on his mom, Angela's, his hand on his mom's arm, Hannah Mae next to him. And there's a little Chris up front. And then you see, so it's to know what happened to those people is so eerie for me to look. All right. To look at pictures like that. Sometimes, I'm sorry, I'm still learning. I'm going to incorporate something here in a minute, but it just did it for me a little too quickly. All right. So let's get down to testimony that happened today. It was painful. It was sad. And that's just really about all you can say. So remember, the prosecutor is going in chronological order. So as these scenes were responded to, that's the order that she's going in, or they are going in. So the before the jury is brought in, though, today, the judge, there was a motion filed for court to take judicial notice all about what county Dana's home is in. We're still there, y'all. So the parties stipulated that the house is in Scioto County, And the defense says, we're not making a motion to dismiss or anything like that. And yesterday, I looked it up. So the agencies agreed that Pike County would take the case, but it could get a little hairy about the search warrants. I don't know if the defense is going to go that route, but we will see. All right. So, first witness on the stand opted out, Daryl Hart, who was an EMT, who responded to Dana's house. And he was actually brought in to tend to the baby as the house was still being cleared just to get this newborn out of the house. He said she was sluggish when he walked in. She was snuggled against Hannah Mae, and he flicked the baby's foot to see if she was okay, and she responded normally. So her diaper was soaked with blood and feces, and they placed that diaper in an evidence bag. And due to her being sluggish, the EMT gave her some oxygen. And April, which is James Roden's wife, was asking to hold her, but was told no. I think eventually she accompanied that baby to the hospital. He took the baby to another EMS unit who took her to the hospital. This EMT, ironically, knew Dana Roden from the medical community and said she was a nice lady. So they showed, again, some pictures we saw yesterday, the front of the trailer, the front door, the bedroom. They also showed, again, Hannah Mae's body in bed. The same juror looked away, according to Eric Big E, who was in the courtroom today. And there was no cross on that witness. So the next witness, Lord have mercy, broke my heart. Donald Stone, who found Kenneth Roden's body and made the 911 call. We are going to play that 911 call right now so you can hear it. I've learned how to do that. I'm so excited about this new stuff. Here we go.
Yeah, I need a deputy to come out to close to 799 West Fort. Okay. All this stuff is on the news. 911. There's Pike County, sir. All this stuff is on the news. I just found my cousin with a gunshot wound. Okay. Sir, is he alive? No. Okay. You're at 799 West Fort? It's close to 799. I don't know what his address is. Because he don't have a box. You don't have a box. Okay. I'll be standing out by the red wagon. What's your name, sir? Donald Stone. Donald Stone? Donald Stone. Stone? Yeah, I'm his cousin. What's his name? Kenneth Roden. Kenneth Roden? Yeah. Okay, sir, are you out of the house? I'm out of the house right now. I just went in, hollered at him, and checked, and I looked and he had a gunshot wound. Okay, sir, we're going to get deputies out there to you, okay? All right. Bye.
All right. So that was the 911 call placed by this gentleman here. Bless his heart, y'all. To me, this is the price. This is the living victim that I often say. He has gloves on because he has a skin condition with his hands. And on the bottom there, you see Kenneth and Chris Sr.'s mother being this was right after they showed Kenneth's body on the screen, and she's being consoled by somebody. And you see Donald, bless his heart. Here's my thing. Here's what really speaks volumes to me. These family members, with the exception of a couple yesterday, and that's understandable. But we are seeing more family members who are vulnerable and upset and showing their emotions to the world opt in to be videoed. And we're seeing law enforcement opt out. And I think one part of it for me speaks volumes about it's kind of like love. To be that vulnerable and know you're being filmed, to me, just says a lot about his character. So Kenneth was his cousin and they were really close from childhood. Anytime Donald was down, he said Kenneth was there to help him. And Kenneth was married and had 3 children. Donald and Kenneth would go to auctions together and they would buy cars and fix them up to sell. So Donald had an appointment that morning and talked to someone while he was there. And the person asked if he had heard what had happened up on Union Hill Road. So he went home and made some phone calls to Kenneth, who was obviously deceased, his son Luke, Kenneth's son Luke. And once he got word there were people meeting at a church, he just went there. And he had been on his way to Chris Sr.'s, but he had been to Chris Sr.'s once to work on Kenneth's truck that was on Chris's property. I'm sorry. There were a lot of people at the church, family and others. He estimated it to be about 150 people. I've seen an interview with that pastor, and he said a lot of the community just came to that church just to gather. This is a small community, so everybody knows everybody, it seems. He knew some people had been murdered, but he didn't know how many at that point. So while at the church, they got word that Kenneth was not answering phone calls or anything. So Kenneth's son, Luke, who will testify later, he decided to go to Kenneth's and ask Donald, who is on the screen here, and a cousin named Sean to go with him. So they walk up to the door, and once they got to the door, he told Luke, this is your dad's place. You need to go in first. And so Donald followed right behind him. The door was unlocked, and he had a padlock that he would lock when he left every morning. He left very early. Remember, he would go to Chris Sr.'s to take a shower before work. And then he worked in, I believe, Columbus, Ohio. So the door was unlocked, and they walk into the living room area, and he saw a stairway to the right. And if you've been in a camper, sometimes the bedrooms are up about 3 stairs. And so Donald walked up to the right and saw Kenneth in bed, and he said he had blood all over his face. And at this point, poor Donald was shaking and crying. He said he knew he was dead. And so they left the residence. Luke asked if they could go to the building to see if someone was maybe hiding out in there. So they went and opened the door, but nobody was there. There was also marijuana in there. Kenneth had a grow operation at his house, a much smaller one, I think, than Chris Sr. So they were he said he was unaware that Kenneth was growing marijuana. So in the 911 call you just heard, they had walked to the end of the driveway to do that. The reception at Kenneth's was terrible. In fact, they showed a picture of his cell phone leaned up against his window in the trailer because apparently that was the only spot he could get a signal where he was. So we heard the 911 call, and someone arrived on a 4-wheeler, looking for things in trees. He was looking for those trail cams to see if they could pull them down and get any kind of information. And Donald said if he was taking anything from there, don't do it, because they had called 911. So they stayed until police arrived. And once the police got there, they handcuffed Donald and put him in the police car. And then they took him and Kenneth's son, Luke, to the police station. He said they never took DNA, fingerprints, or clothing. Douglas knew he grew weed back in the field, but did not know about that indoor grow of the door they had just opened. So they show photos of Kenneth's house inside and out. I'm going to throw these up on the screen. This bottom left picture is like the porch area on his trailer. And the inside photos, I don't think they showed because they might have been graphic. Donald was at the foot of Kenneth's bed when he saw him and found him dead. You can just hear weeping in the courtroom at this point. At the foot of the bed, there was money, coins, keys, and a pair of pants. There was a dog at Kenneth's, but he didn't see it that day. He said the dog usually stayed outside, but that day the dog was inside right by the door. And Donald never really knew the Wagners. He said the Rodens were a very, very close-knit family, and this was sweet. He said their mother fed me when I was young. They were helpful, and when talking about the Rodens in general, would help anyone and looked out for each other and would protect each other. And on cross, he asked if he needed a moment to collect himself, and Donald said, "I'm good." So he asked what kind of car they drove to Kenneth, and Donald said it was a yellow car. He does not know what kind. All right, so these pictures, real quick, before I pull them, let me just explain. I'll put the link in the description for those of you who are podcast listeners. Top left is just driveway area with his trailer in view. Directly to the right of that is that shed where there was a grow operation. Apparently, there were some steps that went kind of underground where the marijuana was being grown. And then the red arrow there was pointing to a security camera. So I'm going to pull this up. Again, this is the grow op. On the right is that shack. Down on the left is some of the plants in that kind of underground area. So defense asked Kenneth to point out exactly where Kenneth lived. They pull out the kind of overhead shot. There were 3 structures on Kenneth's property, and the defense asked how far he parked from the front door of Kenneth's camper, and Donald just wasn't sure. The defense says, "You were asked by authorities if you took anything from the residence. You said you didn't need to because Kenneth was well off and would give you money if you needed it." And he said yes. The defense said in questioning, you were asked about the weed. You said you knew of the field grow, and Donald said yes. The defense said you told the BCI agent you knew Kenneth had been trafficking marijuana, and Donald said yes. So Luke, who is Kenneth's son, was the first to enter, and the defense says you followed. Both of you were inside the camper and you stood at the foot of that bed, and Donald said yes. So that was really he was on the stand for a while. It broke my heart. I actually got really teary-eyed watching. It's that emotion is so raw. And unfortunately, anytime, he may be 15 years down the road and his mind goes back to that day and he's going to be a mess. It's living victims. They suffer forever too. So the next witness was Luke Roden, who is the son of Kenneth. His parents were married about 15 or 16 years and divorced when he was about 14 or 15. He has 2 living sisters, and he also had a brother who died of cancer. And I couldn't understand him here, but he talked about his dad and said his dad gave him, I think he said, a truck for Luke to go to school for trucking. Kenneth called him the night of the murders around 9 p.m. to be sure everything was squared away and he was good to go. He normally saw his dad 3 to 4 times a week, and he said that his dad had been working in Columbus, Ohio for about 2 to 3 years. And so since working in Columbus and had no running water, he would go to Chris Senior's to take a shower. If he didn't need a shower, he would just head to Columbus. So Kenneth was close to his siblings, and Luke said especially Chris. And he had lived in this location for about 3 to 4 years in this trailer. Kenneth had another brother named Brady who also lived close to him. And he knew his dad grew marijuana at Left Fork Road in the bottom of the shack on the property, and he helped him trim the plants. And he didn't really know the Wagners very well. With Jake, him and Hannah came over at one point, and he was talking to Jake, was saying he wanted to get a tattoo. He saw Jake at Chris's once before, and then one time, it was Luke, Hannah Mae, Jake, George, and George's ex-wife, Tabitha. They all went swimming in this place called Miller's Pond that was behind their Uncle Brady's house. And he met Billy once on Billy's property. He said it was far off the grid. He said you turn in and you take a gravel road about a mile before you got to where they met him. So his dad, Kenneth, and Chris had loaned Billy a backhoe. And he tried to start the backhoe up and it wouldn't start. So he called Kenneth and Chris to help. So they brought some tarps and a space heater to get that warmed up so it would start. It was super cold outside. And Luke was standing there beside Billy, and Billy says to him, "You see those 2 people," talking about Kenneth and Chris, They're really good people, but if I had a tussle with them, I'd have to shoot them, which is really odd. The place it was a mile off the road, that gravel road. He said that Luke said he was close to Frankie. They did derby racing together, and he would go with Frankie to the cockfights that they all kind of took part in, which I think is super cruel. It's bad stuff, but so they'd be at someone's house in a field when they would do this stuff. Luke lived close to Frankie, and he also said Frankie liked to hunt, and he never saw George and Frankie together. Remember, the defense is trying to say that George and Frankie were super close. So the morning of the murders, his mom came into his bedroom and told him to get up because Chris and everyone was shot on the hill. So she had gotten a phone call informing her. They went to the hill, but it was blocked off. So they ended back up at that same church. So Luke tried to call his dad like a dozen times with no response. And he said that was not normal. Kenneth would have been working that day. So Luke decides to go to his camper. And sometimes he said if his dad's blood pressure was messing up, he would stay home from work because it made him really, really sick. So we all know he went with Donald and wasn't sure about who else. Maybe his cousin, Sean Watson. He said it was a rush, obviously. You don't hear from your dad and you've got dead relatives on pretty much the same road. I mean, Kenneth was a little ways up, but still, your mind goes there, I'm sure. So when he got to Kenneth's trailer or his dad's trailer, he saw the truck was still there. And he went to the door to tell him what was going on, opened the door, yelled, no response. So Donald stepped up inside, looked in, and ran past Luke, telling him to get out. He said, he's been shot. There's blood all over his face. So as we know, they walked down to the road to call 911, and they sat and waited on the cops, and Luke's sister showed up. Then Luke was taken to the sheriff's department. Luke said he did not go into his dad's bedroom. He did step up and he saw his leg and the top of his head. He said he could see his forehead and his hair, but he said a blanket had been placed on him. He did see some $1 and $5 bills. He said it didn't look like a lot of money, and he said his pants were laying beside the money. So Brett Hatfield is a friend of the family, and he has been for 7 years or so, and he showed up on his four-wheeler while they were waiting on cops to look for any kind of trail cams. Kenneth's dog, Brownie, was inside. He let the dog out while he was at work, but when he came home, it was an inside dog with him. It says, he locked the place when he left with that padlock on the outside of the door, and inside the door, Luke said it would lock, but when they got there, it was unlocked. So he doesn't remember if the police took any kind of DNA or anything from him. I'm sure it was a blur. He was taken to the police station in a police cruiser. And also, Kenneth had a sensor at the end of the driveway, which would alert him like a doorbell in his house if somebody was approaching. And Luke was told it wasn't working for a day or two prior to that, which is interesting. You have to wonder, did they come and use that jammer and then do something to not make it work? Or was it just a fluke? So Kenneth had cameras on his property also. He had one outside in a tree close to the camper and then one close to the grow room. And we just showed that picture. I've got that red arrow pointing to that camera right there. He said that on the one in the tree, it would show you if you walked between the camper and the grow room. And then we seen a picture of the phone in the window to get reception. They show photos of his dad's bedroom off camera, and they also show him a photo of his dad's body. He says he doesn't remember the blanket being that way, but him and Donald did not touch it. So then they get into the grow op, and he didn't know how many plants were there. He didn't go into any of the other homes and couldn't get close to them. So real quick, we're going to do our paid sponsor of the week, GladSkin. If you've been living with eczema, acne, rosacea, you can relate to the frustration of trying dozens of products over the years without any long-term relief. With GladSkin, you can expect something different. Did the eczema you had as a kid follow you into adulthood? Living with a visible skin condition like eczema can impact your sleep, confidence, and sense of self. You deserve better than that. You're a rock star. So, which is why it's time to rethink your eczema treatment with Gladskin. It's affects millions of people in the US, but the way it's treated isn't working. So Gladskin is rethinking what caring for inflammatory skin condition looks like by working with your skin and not against it. It's so effective that 91% of users, adults and children who have tried their top-selling eczema cream reported significant improvement after just 7 days. My great niece, 3 days, by the way. Gladskin with Micrio is a steroid-free. It works without harsh ingredients, and it's clinically proven to reduce eczema symptoms. It's even gentle enough for little bitty babies. So if you've been frustrated with your treatment options, don't wait to try Gladskin. They're offering my listeners 15% off plus free shipping. That's a lot of money you're going to save right there. And at your first order at gladskin.com/whattheworld. That's gladskin.com/whattheworld for 15% off plus free shipping. Love this stuff, y'all. I've been using it since they sent it. It is the best. Shampoo bar rocks. So that's gladskin.com/whattheworld. All right, back to our testimony. Luke said his dad was a heavy sleeper when he wasn't feeling well. And if he felt fine, he was actually a very light sleeper. At one point, Chris got beat up and Kenneth retaliated. And that was something we heard in openings was that possibly a motive to kill Kenneth because he did go after somebody who hurt Chris. So on Cross, really, it didn't get heated at all. But this Luke guy seemed to be such a sweetheart. And really where this is going, and I can see it, they're trying to take the focus off the custody issue and make this a drug issue. 100%, that's my theory. So they talk about the grow op. And he said he didn't know how many plants were there. He didn't go into any of the other homes because he couldn't get close to those homes on Union Hill. So, the defense says you talk about a swimming hole. Who was there? He recounts me, Jake, Hannah Mae, George, Tabitha. And the defense asked how long ago. He said probably 2014. It was years ago. Here we go again with this 4th of July. He says, you're familiar with the fireworks display that Chris puts on? And he says, yes. He's asked, do you recall seeing George there? And Luke says, no. Defense asked, do you hunt? Yes. Did Frankie hunt? Yes. That's another thing. They're asking all these witnesses that knew Frankie if he hunted. I'm curious to see where the defense is going with all this. And then he was asked, did you hunt with Frankie? And he said no. So he asked about when they went to Billy's to help with the equipment and asked when was that? And he really struggled to remember when that happened. He said sometime between 2010 and 2012. And then the defense asked, how long was your dad living in that camper? And Luke said about 3 or 4 years. So after April 22nd, the defense says you were interviewed on several occasions by law enforcement. And Luke says yes. And the defense says you were aware that notes were being taken, right? And Luke says yes. So the defense says, I'm going to refer to those notes. So we saw a picture of a shed next to your dad's camper, and inside was a basement or lower level, and that's where we saw the weed plants. Inside, you said there was a trail cam, and he said yes. And he asked, was a picture ever taken of you in that shed? And he said, I'm not sure. The defense says, any occasion where you were washing rocks in there? And Luke said, I helped pack rocks. And the defense says those rocks were used to grow marijuana. They were grown in the rocks with water. And Luke says yes. And the defense says, is that known as hydroponic? And Luke says yes. So the defense says, would you agree with me that it's a higher grade of marijuana and sells for more? And Luke says yes. So he then says, you sold marijuana as a middleman for your dad. How much per pound? And he said $2,600 per pound of this marijuana. And then the defense attorney says, you said $2,800 to $3,000 to BCI. And Luke said, that's possible. Those plants would be moved out of the building in 3 to 4 months, then taking out. And then the defense asks, is this the cycle? And Luke says, yes. So the defense asks, those plants would be taken where? And Luke says, to Chris Roden's. And where would the plant go once at Chris's? And Luke said the plant didn't go, just the product that came off the plant. And then he went back to the sale of marijuana and talked about, are you familiar with dabs? And he said, yes. And he said, did your dad deal dabs or offer to deal dabs? And he said he was offered to, but I'm not sure if he did. So the defense attorney asks, what are dabs? Luke said it's a concentration of the THC. It looks like a wax. And I'm not sure how it's supposed to be a really small amount that is very, very, very potent. So, and then the defense says, we established your dad was engaged in the trafficking of marijuana. And Luke says, yes. The defense says at some point, is it your understanding he was going to get out of it? And Luke said, yes. He talked about him giving the land to Gary because he was ready to leave. Gary was supposed to pick up where Kenneth left off. And the defense attorney asked that. Luke said, yes. The defense says, can you tell us who Big Money Mike is? Luke said, I couldn't tell you. I've heard his name. And then he's asked, when did you hear about Big Money Mike? And Luke said, I didn't hear it until after everything had happened with the murders. And the defense asked, why was your father going to get out? And Luke said he didn't know. So the defense says, we spoke of the one time you conducted the transaction. I don't think Luke was a regular middleman for his dad from the way I took it, but maybe a couple of times he did. Were you the middleman? And Luke says no. The defense asks, who would be? Luke said, I don't know. Gary has in the past. And then the defense asks, were you aware of Chris Sr.'s drug trafficking? Luke said, just the marijuana and some narcotics. And he asked if people worked for his dad doing this. And Luke said he had help. The defense names off 2 people, and Luke confirms, yes, they did, and they were paid for their work. So the defense asks, are you familiar with compressed marijuana? Is that being grown? And Luke said, no, that's a brick. So a lot of times if you see big drug busts, you'll see what looks like a brick. That's what they mean by compressed marijuana. Luke said, I know they sold compressed, and I don't know who they was. The defense attorney didn't ask him to clarify. So what about purchasing them? And Luke said, no. He asks if he knows a James. And Luke says, younger or older? And the defense attorney says, older. That was my buddy's dad. The defense says, are you aware of anyone who owed your dad money? And Luke said, probably so. He said, I'd say everybody owes somebody. And the defense says, you never had a conversation about that? And Luke said, no. The defense says, your involvement with selling, do you recall talking to these guys about that? Talking about the agents. And Luke says, yes. The defense attorney says, you are aware that's illegal? And Luke says, yes. The defense attorney says, you were never charged? No. The defense asked about the padlock on the outside of Kenneth's trailer. He said it was broken laying on the ground and that day. And Luke said, I don't think it was broken. It was just unlocked and laying on the ground. So, if you have a padlock and you unlock it, sometimes it just slips out. And he thinks that's what's happened. The defense asked about Kenneth locking the door from the inside. And Luke says he thought he could lock it from the inside, but he knows for sure when he left, he would padlock it. So on redirect by the state, you were asked about the pond when Jake, Hannah, George, and his ex went swimming. Do you know if they were married? And he said, I do not know. You said that was quite some time ago. And the prosecutor asked, do you think that was before or after Sophia had been born? Sophia is Jake and Hannah's baby, by the way. I'm sure most of you know. He said, I want to say this was before. Then she says, you were asked about a conversation on Billy's property that was with Billy. And he was the one who said Kenneth and Chris were great guys, but if they ever messed with us, I'd have to shoot him. And he says yes. And I think the prosecutor said something about it being a compliment and not a threat. It was hard to hear. I wouldn't take that as a compliment. And then she said, "You were asked about the price per pound for marijuana." And he said, "Yes." She asked, "Do you have any idea how many pounds you would get from a harvest?" And he said, "Around 3 pounds." Then she said, "You were asked about your dad's intent to get out of the marijuana business. How long before he was killed did he say that?" And Luke said it was about a couple of months before. "You were asked about people owing your dad money. Did your dad routinely help people?" And Luke said yes. And she said, "Do you know if your dad's camper locked from the inside?" Luke said he could not be certain. Then this is the first time we've heard George's name so far since this started. At least talking to witnesses. "Is George Wagner in the courtroom?" And he said yes. And she said, "Can you point to him and tell me what he's wearing?" And he points right to George, looks dead at him. So on recross, the defense, "You were asked about harvest. How many pounds did you get per harvest?" And he said 3. "You looked at George and pointed to him. Does he look like he used to?" And Luke says yes. And the defense is like, "Anything different?" And Luke says, "Weight wise." And the defense says, "He was much larger when you saw him last." And Luke said, yes. I don't know why they want to put in there that this was something that came up at a hearing where the defense and the prosecution's talking about how great George looks from his weight loss. Apparently, his defense attorneys are super proud of his weight loss. But I'm going to tell you, pokey food apparently is not good. So he's probably not chowing down up in there. All right. So the next to last witness was a family friend, Brett Hatfield, who came in on the four-wheeler. He rode to work with Kenneth, or he was the one to drive. They kind of switched off. And he had knew the Rodens for around 13 years. He had met Frankie at Union Hill Church. He said Frankie was super clean, didn't drink or smoke, and Kenneth rarely did due to his job. And he said Kenneth was complaining of his blood pressure the day before the murder. So the morning of the murders, he came to pick Kenneth up around 4 a.m. There were no lights, so he left. And he kind of thought maybe Kenneth had just went to the hospital for his blood pressure. So Jake Roden, not Jake Wagner, by the way, Jake Roden called and asked him if he had heard about Chris being shot. So he tried calling and messaging essentially everybody that had been murdered. He sent a message to Hannah Mae that was interestingly read at 9:30 a.m. Wonder who read that. Brett got on his four-wheeler to collect trail cams, but they had been removed. He knew of the grow operation with Kenneth and Chris, and he said he knew of a big drug deal out west, but it got canceled. He said it was supposed to be for hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of marijuana. He said Billy and Chris actually started to drive out west, but Chris got really nervous and decided not to go through with it. So he made a call and had somebody come pick him up in Cincinnati. It's not known if Billy went by himself or went back. So Billy was telling people a man named Skid Montgomery was involved in drugs with him and Chris, but they were phasing him out. And he said that's who killed Chris. He said Chris always had a lot of money on him. And he said Chris had a bag at one point with $400,000 in it. He knew Chris was involved in cockfighting, and apparently Chris had won $30,000 from one single fight. So on cross, he said Gary used cocaine, and he had seen some in Chris's safe before. As far as selling marijuana, he said Chris would sell the pot. It took 3 months to grow, and he would sell it within 2 to 3 weeks. He also said Chris had a business partner in Cincinnati, but he didn't know who it was. The defense gave the vibe that this person was also in the drug business with Chris. Last witness, super, super quick, Deputy Bo Romine. He was off duty when the bodies were discovered. He came out for extra manpower. When he got there, they put him on regular patrol. He was later dispatched to Kenneth's trailer, and he and another deputy were first on scene at Kenneth's, and they secured the scene. So after his testimony, that was it. The day was over. And this poor guy right here breaks my heart. All right, guys. So here's the plan. Tomorrow, we're going to finish up testimony. I'm going to finally watch Sins of Our Mother. make some notes, maybe do a couple of bonus episodes over the weekend because I'm doing Wagner all week. So I'm going to get some Lori stuff in. And for all you guys that don't have Netflix, also, I'm going to hopefully launch my merch store this weekend. I am committed to getting this out there. Super excited for you guys to see it. In the meantime, have a good sleep. Almost midnight. I'm out. See you tomorrow.
Okay, round two. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.